We are so happy to have you all joining us here today. I am Amanda Bograd. I'm the CMO here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc. I so appreciate you taking your time to learn and grow in community with us. Today, we're joined by Dr. Timothy Dukes and Michael Landers. As many of you know, Conscious Capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism in business. It's a movement of business leaders around the world working to change the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to catalyzing that movement. Every week, we're offering virtual gatherings here as a way for the community to see how this philosophy is taking shape in the leadership journeys and business practices of those in our community. Today's gathering is scheduled for about 30 to 45 minutes. Tim and Michael will be running an interactive session followed by conversation and then opening up to audience questions. Please type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be using the chat portion of your screen for our interactive session. If you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org and we'll get right back to you and help you get set up. So our speakers today are part of our founding authors at Conscious Capitalism Press, and they're releasing their new book, Present Company, next week. So I had the opportunity to read their book early on, and then I reread it again in the midst of the pandemic and during our shutdowns. And what I find so interesting and so helpful is that for people like Tim and Michael, they see a roadmap for how teams work together and how conscious leaders tap into the team environment. And that's what they outlined in Present Company. I remember when I read the book again, and I was noticing the many ways this roadmap can be applied for presence and clarity in our teamwork, despite the chaos that has been taking shape in our world so much recently. So it's my pleasure now to introduce you to Dr. Timothy Dukes and Michael Landers. Tim is a veteran psychotherapist, leadership advisor, and father. His expertise in creating and holding a transformational process instills presence in leadership for individual, partnership, family, team, and organizational development. Michael Landers is the founder and president of Culture Crossing, a global consulting company dedicated to finding innovative solutions for leaders and teams working in multicultural contexts. Welcome, Tim and Michael. We are so happy to have you guys here today to share with us.
So where do we begin?
Yeah, let's, you say this, Tim, which I always appreciate, which is what needs our attention today, right? And I always love that because it's like, it makes me think, okay, what does need my attention? But before even going there, what I've started to see and do is, where's my attention coming from, right? So that might be an interesting place to start for everyone who's on the call today.
All right, so let's do part of this work, part of the body of this work. One of the 4 powers is an induction. And why don't we begin there with everybody that's on the call? And all an induction is it's a opportunity to switch, to transition from wherever you currently find yourself. So I'm really speaking to everybody on the call. Just take a moment to and get a sense of the transition that you're making to show up here and be on this call.
Yeah, what can you let go of? What can I leave behind, right? In order to focus on participating in this community gathering in the way that I want to, right?
So,
and
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, it could be emails. It could be the fact that you wanted to get that cup of tea, so hop up and get it so you can be here fully. An adjustment. Even take a moment to see what your breath is doing. Right? This is part of making a transition into the present moment, which we're asking to do on your terms, not on our terms.
Nice.
So the question we're going to ask you to respond to, if you have a piece of paper or on your computer, is what am I ignoring? You ask yourself that question. What am I forgetting? What am I leaving behind in order to focus on this next period of time and participating in this community gathering? And just jot that down if you would. And then what is emerging? As Michael mentioned a moment ago, what is calling your attention? Not so much out here in the fact that we're presenting the book we spent, what, 2 years on, Michael?
something like that.
Yeah. And that's part of it, but more it's what's calling your attention? What's your reason for being here?
Tim and Michael, what really comes to top of mind for me is I'm ignoring a to-do list. And one of the main reasons that I really wanted to be in this space today is I find it really hard to transition when you have back-to-back meetings, back-to-back Zoom calls. It's really hard to find presence because my physical space hasn't changed. And sometimes I haven't moved out of that headspace of my last meeting because I literally hit the red button to leave to enter a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true. We see that a lot, and I feel that as well, Amanda, which is, the whole pandemic for a lot of us has created this loss of transitions. So one of the things we look at is, can you create permission to transition? And what we're talking about here, this induction, right, is a permission to transition, right? To let go of, to recognize where you're coming from and where you might be going. One of the things that I let go of when I start meetings is I close windows. Because if not, I end up clicking around, and Tim's always like, Michael, you're clicking again. So I always try to be like, I gotta close my windows. He's like, they're doing that clicking thing again.
Oh,
And
that's
it's
what
good.
you're
It
doing.
brings
Yeah,
you back.
never could figure that out.
Now it's revealed.
Good.
Yeah. So Tim, for everybody, when they're looking at saying, okay, what am I forgetting? What am I leaving behind? Okay, and if they're able to put that down, internalize that, what's that next question for them? When all that is done and completed, and they're mindful of it, now what is present for you, right?
Yeah.
What is present when you're able to take that next step of, I'm mindful of what I ignored, what I'm forgetting, what I'm leaving behind, in order to focus here. And now what's revealed?
Here's a quote from a colleague, Tony Hiss, and this comes from his book In Motion, which I think it's the thing about, and your question is like, okay, so we're letting go of the obstacles in a sense, letting go of the distractions, letting go of the previous meeting. But what's there? How do you let go? And then what do you reach out toward? And this is how he does a beautiful job of presencing and talking about how to show up in the present moment. He said, but it was the familiar situations, the ones that were still what they had always been, that seemed the most transformed. It wasn't as if they had changed shape or color, but they now seemed charged with purpose. That's the key, charged with purpose. That's what you're kind of sorting for in the present moment. What's charged with purpose? What is beckoning? What is calling out? And almost glowing or shimmering with each detail etched in the sharpest kind of focus. Each person or situation I looked at seemed now to have a story curled inside of it. So the present moment has stories curled inside of it, right, that want your attention. And present company, cultivating cultures of high performance in teams and organizations, is a matrix or a framework or a map, really. I like Amanda thought of it being a map. And it's a very minimalist infrastructure to support the individual person or leader to find your way into the moment, just as we're in beckoning you to do right now. It isn't out here, the answers to presence. And we do distinguish between presence and mindfulness in our work.
Yeah, which is a good thing, because I was just talking to Tim earlier today, where we're working on an article for a magazine, and what the subject is, the myths of presence. And so just doing a due diligence, looking online, Googling, what are some myths of presence? Everything that came back on Google, right? Major search engine, the #1 search engine in the world, everything that came back was around executive presence and charisma, right? So defining terms is really important, and we kind of use this this architecture and this map, as Tim was sharing and Amanda was talking about with us, to say it's a skill you can build. But that question, Tim, about what is the difference, and the distinguishing between presence and mindfulness. It's not a versus thing, it's an and thing. So you have that story. I love that one from a visual standpoint. I don't know if you're open to sharing it.
Totally. You know how things, probably I'm going to move my office to the shower because all my best thoughts come in the shower. So as soon as I get the technology for that. But so this morning, I'm remembering this years, 35 years ago. Joseph Goldstein here in Salzburg, a couple of the core Dharma teachers around mindfulness were teachers for me and eventually friends. And they're extraordinary in their teachings about mindfulness. And this is how Joseph described mindfulness. He said they trained in Bodh Gaya, India with a teacher called Manindra Ji. And so Joseph this is a question he posed to the teacher. So he says, I'm walking up the hill and I'm very mindful, lifting my foot, placing it, feel the sensation, the sounds around me becomes, I'm hearing, I look up and I'm seeing and I'm aware of seeing, and it's sort of a dark shade of gray. Then I go back to the feeling of my foot lifting and moving and placing and hearing, and I'm, the rickshaws, the cows, the monkeys, the birds, and I go back and the gray's getting darker, and I go back to my feet, and then all of a sudden I go back to hearing, and all I hear is screaming for people to, look out, look out, look out. So I lift up my head, and that gray shape was a huge elephant charging directly toward me. Okay. Mindfulness is really good for training the mind to greet the threshold of experience, or greet experience on the threshold. Extraordinary on all levels of the body-mind function. Presence, the way we talk about it, is that it incorporates the other, right? It's ecological. It's not ecological to be mindful of a charging elephant. It's ecological to get out of the way, which Joseph did.
Yeah.
So in presence, it's a intersubjective or position that's inclusive of not only the other person, but literally any living entity, so that we're as aware of their experience of us as we are aware of our experience of them.
Yeah. And the term I remember you shared with me years ago was, which I hadn't heard before, and I think it further illustrates what you're sharing now, which is the action or the act of gifting that entity your presence, whether it's be a tree, a person, but the living thing. So talk a little bit about that gift, right? That we can gift each other our presence, and moves us out of that mindfulness space into that kind of co-inhabited space where a third thing could arise between the two of us, right?
Yeah. Now that third thing is obviously something we talk a lot about in the book. And it isn't just about my experience of my reality.
Mm-hmm.
It's about your experience of my reality and of your own reality, but it's also about what emerges as a result of our dialogue, or us fashioning a life together, whatever scale that is. Could be part of a team, could be partnership, could be marriage. This is, again, because I'm kind of like nuts about this guy, and I just found these quotes the other day. I'm going to share what he says, Tony Hiss. This is something that people can choose to do, presence, all by themselves and for themselves, and at almost any moment. As soon as someone finds out how to get in touch with, actually, it's easier than it sounds. Sense is more like resuming contact with. Presence is about resuming contact with what is a built-in, active, oddly ignored, complex, discriminating, many-dimensional, and remarkably ancient capacity. And we definitely explore this every which way in the book, about almost like a primordial or preeminent capacity we have to recognize our connection.
Yeah.
Different than having to build it. And he closes by, we grow up fully equipped for such an adventure.
I love that. So we all have this skill and this ability to be present, right? It's not only for certain people. And we're kind of highlighting today the what of presence, and that quote continues to support that. As we look to pivot, I'm sure some people might be thinking possibly, okay, great, I think I get this what. I like to distinguish between mindfulness and presence and the importance there, and something that I could do. But how, right? The how is always a big question for people. In the book, we kind of go over this architecture where we kind of looked at the things that we could do, that anybody can do, really. Everybody can practice it, especially if you're leading teams, but just as equally important at home with partners and colleagues and friends and family. But the 4 powers of presence is kind of this map, this architecture, and then a map of how to do it. And it starts with this idea of induction, right? Where you'll learn kind of how to enter a moment with the right mindset, recognizing what you left behind, giving space for what's there, and what you didn't even know was there when you got there, right? The dynamic that you're entering into. From there, it breeds our next power, which is awareness. And at that point, your mind's trained, right, to hold space for all the different things you're seeing, right? You're mindful in that space of awareness. And once awareness is allowed to kind of be thriving and open, we can start to be authentic, which is our next power, right? You'll be able to explore vulnerability and truth with a team. And when those 3 are together, that induction, becoming to awareness, and then breeding authenticity, connection has its first kind of opportunity to be fostered. And that's what we're looking at with presence, is connections and true engagement, right? And so that's the kind of architecture of the how. And then just to speak to the book briefly, we really have a lot of specific, simple, practical things that people can do. And there's some self-assessments in it as well to see where am I doing this? Where could I do it more? But that's kind of what we've been working on for years. And the book came out of Tim and I having present dialogues, essentially. And that third thing that arose between us is in that book. What I missed, Tim?
I just hope I didn't transpose names. I was referring to Michael Hiss, not Michael Higgs, or Tony Hiss. Did I mix that up?
No, you said Tony Hiss. You're right.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah.
I was just skimming through the chat window as well, seeing some of the responses. I don't think you missed anything around that. I think of that capacity. It's in letting go as much as listening deeply that we, in a sense, recover our capacity to be present. It's not an effort. The more you effort, it's like, there in the book, there's a story of I'm walking with a friend, John, we're in the forest. And he was a hunter out of Minnesota. And it's a sacred red grove here in California. And it was kind of a meditative experience. And he kind of whispers to me as we're going through, he said, all the life that was here before we arrived won't really return until we leave, in an hour or so. So how do we enter the present moment in such a way that we don't scare away all the creatures with our egos, with our assumptions, with our agenda, with our determination? Can we soften those forces that drive us, and in the same way, use the opportunity to listen deeply to the other person, the situation, the culture, the dynamics, the tree, if you will. And it's in that listening that I really do think we activate something that's far greater than we are. That in Buddhism, they say, if you take care of the mindfulness will take care of you. Or if you take care of the Dharma will take care of you, the truth. So it's cultivating our capacity to listen, maybe.
Yeah. Right. And in that, we see with teams specifically, when they are able to cultivate that capacity to listen, or raise that capacity to listen to each other, their space allowed, right? That space enables empathy, right? And connection. And a lot of the problems that we see within teams is because they're not listening to each other, right? they're entering into situations and displacing all the stuff that they haven't processed maybe onto everybody else without recognizing the impact that's having.
Yeah, and that takes us back to induction. I mean, think of the team, one of the teams we've worked with, and I have this metaphor of, it's like trying to, for some of these senior executives, if they're trying to land a 747 in a little local airport, there's just not enough runway for them. There's not enough time, there's not enough space. They're coming in with way too much power, huge agendas, big responsibilities, bottom line commitments, profit requirements, relationships they can't comprehend or understand because of the complexity, and they don't have the time to figure it out. So it's, in order to be able to listen, you have to show up, and that's not an easy task. You know, that's where the guidance piece comes in.
I would like to kick us off with a question that we started on a conversation with the three of us, and it was one of those times where you wish that you had recorded the answer. So I'm gonna throw that one back over to us. So a lot of people are trying different ways of virtually checking in to try and simulate presence in a virtual meeting. One of the things that I keep seeing, and our team has done it too, is a one-word check-in. Is this helpful in creating presence? Does this help people check in with each other?
If it's authentic, if it comes from a spot of, you can be cooking a terrific meal. You don't serve the meal, but you can take a spoon and say, what do you think? Have a taste. And that taste will tell you enough about what's coming. So it isn't about volume, or I don't think, or about, it's more about, does it contain the essential ingredients that displays to your colleagues, to your partners, where you stand in that moment.
Yeah.
Is there frame setting that's helpful when you're doing this as a leader, when you're doing this with your team? Is there some frame setting and tone setting maybe that would help?
But I mean, think to Tim's point, it's also, it can't be performative. So that would be a frame setting that I would not follow, which is, okay, everybody do your one word check-in. And someone has a question, or what's a one word check-in? Very often when teams get together, we say, tell us one word, how are you feeling at this moment? And so if we were gonna go around and I'd be like, one word, energized. Somebody else might say a little lagging, tired, what have you. Those are the one word check-ins. But we've seen it sometimes become performative, right, Tim, where people are just like, oh, it's the one word check-in time, so ready to go, on it. And we're like, really? You're really on it
Really?
today? Come on, because I'm not on it. I mean, if you're, talk to me in 5 minutes, that might be a different word, but that's it. I mean, so it could be short, but are you mindful of what you're feeling? And that takes an induction. I have to say, okay, what am I feeling right now? Let me take a moment here. I can't just blurt it out. And then, are you listening to people, right? But I think the check-in serves two purposes, and Tim, justice too, which is, I'm checking in with myself to share with you, so I'm checking in with you. If I don't check in with myself, really, I'm just gonna throw that awesome, upbeat, let's go. That might be true, but did I really check in? Did I take that moment? So I think for the frame is check in with yourself first before you let that word go. Tim, is that, yeah?
No, I love it. Yeah, and what can happen in a power dynamic is that, which we've seen not too long ago, and it literally was around the one word check-in. The thing that you oppress through the power, like, okay, everybody check in, we got 20 seconds. So literally, or 1 minute for 6 people to check in. You'll get one response visible, but there'll be an invisible response that is really what's true. And so it can be counterproductive. You can polarize people right from the beginning of the meeting. I have a cute little story. It involves hand signs, which I won't use. Okay, so we're taking my son to a Quaker school. He eventually went to a Quaker school as a kindergartner. We walk in with the teacher and hear all these, and they're silent. And the teacher breaks silence. She says, hello, children, welcome Dr. and Mrs. Dukes. Their child may be coming to the school. Hello, Dr. and Mrs. Dukes, right? And the teacher turned around, and as we're walking out, I looked back over my shoulder. Literally, these are kindergartners or first graders. All of them had flipped us the bird. literally. And so it's like, it's so brilliant because that's the truth. We disrupted their life. We came in on some other agenda that what didn't honor where they were sitting, and children being unfiltered so beautifully. There are probably more politically correct ways of doing it, but they really told us what they thought about us coming into their space.
Yeah.
So can we evoke the true, authentic position where we stand, where one another stands, and connect with one another legitimately?
Matt, I see another question there, which is actually a good one. Kevin's question, yeah. And Tim,
Kevin's
it says,
question is, what do you do when other people in your team are not students of mindfulness, or they see this as kind of some hippy dippy stuff?
So it's I'll start there, Tim, and then pass it over to you. Yes, Kevin, to your question. So Tim and I work with a lot of teams and executives, C-level suite folks, and and Tim coaches a lot of people at that level in multiple areas and industries, and same here. And they're not so into the mindfulness bit. Like we don't. They're not into the hippy dippy stuff, as you can imagine, at all, right? And so how do we navigate that one, Tim?
First of all, I'm a little allergic to this phrase hippy dippy stuff because it's been around for like 40 years and we're so far beyond it. I think what we can do is you legitimize the value of mindfulness or the value of presence, either through the literature, which is everywhere right now, every single day where it's becoming out. You can go to neuropsychology and talk about the immune response, the vagus response, to living in a context, working in a context that's supportive of the environment, that maximizes your wellness and also your performance. We have so much data. So I think what you can do, I don't know your position inside the organization, but you can greet it with data because there's so much of it now where they didn't used to be.
Right. I think that's right. And then the other thing is when we're doing the stuff, honestly, through Present Company, we don't necessarily tell them what we're doing. We don't necessarily say, hey, here comes the induction, here comes the awareness, get ready, here comes authenticity. All right, boom, we're connected. We go through the process of getting people to listen and holding that space for them, and a team and a leader can do this as well, or somebody on a team can do this with their colleagues, to allow for that communication to happen, and then presence arises. So sometimes if people are resistant to words or have these concepts in their mind, we don't present those words or concepts at all. But the results is usually what makes them go, oh, this stuff works. I get this.
And then there's presence in a team environment is iterative. It isn't like you set it and people are that way. You may have to reset it 5 minutes from now. And what quickly is realized are the gems that are uncovered because people are authentic, because they get to efficient problem solving. Obstacles that were present that everybody stumbled over last week are just not around this week.
Yeah. That's a good point too, which is the presence that we're doing. One of our clients, we're in service of what? In service of the organization, right? But in service of the organization to further business, right? To reach their business goals, to exceed them, but also to cultivate a culture of inclusion and high performance on their teams, right? So it's in service of that thing. And what we find is there's brilliant people, like, oh my goodness, the intelligence level of some of the people that we work with is just outstanding, right? We can't even keep up if we wanted to. Double PhDs, people who don't have education but are brilliant in their own ways and have skills. But when they all get together, a lot of that is just lost because they can't communicate and connect at a level that allows for them to hear each other, right? And so that's why this idea of presence and how we see it is a conduit towards and to high performance. But it's a good point, Kevin, because I think that's a real thing that you bring up.
Yeah, just one last note on that, and let's take another question, is it's inclusive of the heart. That's what's discovered. And when you start including parallel processors like emotions or intuition or deeper unconscious underpinnings or the things or the wisdom that people have in the team that they don't voice because their voice doesn't resonate at the level of the big thumpers, the big talkers, right? So as we gear down, we hear much more dynamic voices, and that informs the process that brings about different types of results.
But my last question is, you guys talk a lot about the capacity to listen. And the capacity we have to listen to each other within meetings. And one of the things that really struck me, because I'll be honest, it's a weakness of mine as well, especially in virtual meetings where I'm trying to make sure I get through everything that I'm trying to get through, is thinking about what else you have to say in that meeting. Do you have a good strategy for people who maybe are anxious or type A, or people who are trying to make sure they get all that they need to say said, so sometimes you have trouble focusing on what the other people are saying in the meeting? I know you guys talk about this a lot in the book, and I would love for the audience to be able to hear this.
I have a tool we haven't talked about, Michael. I can share this quickly.
Please.
Maybe we have. Literally everybody I work with will adopt this sooner or later. And it's, you take your, first of all, I would take notes in every single meeting. And if you take it on paper, it's easier. If you take it on a computer, you can use, I don't know, I use OneNote. The right-hand column is normal notes. Just what I'm observing, what you would normally, what's going on in the meeting. The left-hand column is what's going on inside of me. So I'm dual positioning. I'm watching the meeting, I'm assessing, playing that role, but I'm also self-assessing. And then you learn about yourself in meetings, what drives you. If there's an important point you want to make, you don't lose it because you wrote it in the left column. Then there's different strategies around that. You can take 10 breaths before you express your point. Now, if you're a very senior leader, if you take those 10 breaths, do you know what happens? I'm not going to give you the answer yet, unless I'll give you the answer. Somebody else in the team expresses what you were about to say, right? And when that starts happening, when you're in senior leadership, it's almost magical. It's like, whoa, the less I do, the better, right? So very powerful people don't need to practice being more powerful verbally, externally. They can practice building the other side of their capacity, and that's listening and feeling and reflecting and knowing what strategies drive them to be this way.
Yeah, I like that. And you have shared that too. It's super helpful. Amanda, the other thing that I would say is sometimes when I can't sleep and I'm ruminating over things that I want to do the next day or that's calling my attention, I look at it like I have to get my data out. It's stuck in my mind and it's going around and around. And so is there ways you can get your data out? Some people speak it, some people chant it, some people write it down, and then it's there, and then maybe they can get some sleep. I think in the meetings, if I'm going to a meeting and I want to get my data out, if it's all in here or in here, right, that's where it's going to stay. If I write it down and I see it there, to Tim's point, maybe someone else will bring that out at some point. But the biggest thing, if you want to get your data out, right, if that's what you're in service of in that meeting, you have to inform people. What good is that information going to be if it doesn't land and they're not listening to you? Yeah. You got your data out, but nobody heard it. And so that's really, I think, helps too, which is I want to get this out because I feel it in here, but they really need to hear it. So what is their capacity to hear it? And maybe I'll chunk it down, right?
And that goes right back to the four powers. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, you go. That's all.
Yes, it does go back to the four powers. And my other one is, are they asking for it? And this isn't to you, Amanda, but in general, when you want to get your information out because you're like, oh, I have all this stuff to tell people, are they asking for it? Because if they're not asking for it or they don't need it, then it's like, okay, wait a minute, let me check in. Do I just need to get rid of put that in there? But if they're like, hey, Michael, we need all this information from you. Okay, I have it all. Are you ready to hear it? They're like, yep. Now you have permission essentially to speak. People are ready to take that in.
You also created the context for being the right size for the situation. And what you're describing, Amanda, is people come in often and they're the wrong size for the situation. That's it. So it's how do you size yourself, either up or down, out or in such a way that you fit into the dialogue, you fit into the conversation and can enhance it, not diminish it or disrupt it.
So you're not the 747 trying to land in a small landing strip.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good, it's a real question though. I have it too. That happens to me, right? Where I'm like, oh, Tim knows this because I interrupt him all the time.
We have a question from a participant who wants to know, in this work of zero intimacy, how do you mentor a subordinate in the space of mindfulness?
In the space of zero intimacy, how do you mentor somebody with mindfulness? Was that the question?
Yeah.
What's the space of zero intimacy mean? Do you know, Michael?
I don't know. I'm going to venture that it might be a place. Yeah, that's what I thought. Kevin just wrote it. It's the workplace that forbids intimacy or doesn't look that intimacy is important. And Kevin, I'm assuming we're talking about professional intimacy. Yes, where we're hearing maybe even some levels of vulnerability. How do you mentor somebody in mindfulness? Okay.
Do you want me to take that?
I can speak to a little bit of it. We can both do it.
Yeah, go.
Right.
Go, and I have a piece after you.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious as to say to what's forbidding the intimacy, right? Is it that, oh, we don't talk about that here? Is that the message we get from leaders? Is that the message from the workplace culture that we don't talk about that from here? That's one thing that could be going on. The other thing I see is that maybe the person isn't comfortable to get there, right? And so when I look at trust, sometimes we have levels of it, right? Where I'm credible, which is my words, and I'm reliable, which are my actions. And a lot of people live on those two stages. I'm credible, my words are solid, and my actions match my words. And I'll get to a certain level of trust. To get deeper trust, there has to be some intimacy, right? And share some vulnerability. I know Corey from Roundtable talks about, vulnerability is sexy, and but it's hard, right? And Kevin is sharing here, the workplace is a dangerous place for sharing beyond facts and data. Yes, correct, right? And so, Tim, how do we navigate that where the workplace that Kevin's saying, in many people's workplace, it's a very much credible, reliable world. And yet, if I want to deepen trust, I have to get to that intimacy level. And one thing that I've learned is if you want someone else to share with you, there's no guarantee that they will, but the first step is maybe you share with them, right? You take that step and say, hey, I'm not landing here. I don't know what else to do. I'm stuck. Can you help me out? Right. And we see that with some of our clients, but it might be deeper than that.
Yeah. It reminds me of, minesweeping Cambodia and Laos these days and how dangerous it is to try to farm that territory. Eventually we have to recover the territory of the authentic connection, who we really are together, but man, there's a lot of mines. So I think what you do is you and I talk in the book about continuous engagement. Intimacy is about a continuous engagement that you feather in, you take a minimal risk to bring somebody into a frequency or an accord with you, or a rapport. But rapport has to be on their terms, not on your terms. So if you're mentoring somebody, it has to be safe, number one. And safety is defined not by what I think is safe, but by the mentoree's context they feel safe within. And then can we together sort of calibrate that context for connection, not without assumption. I mean, it is an exquisite opportunity to practice mindfulness, because mindfulness comes up against experience in such a way that it doesn't aggress upon it, but it also doesn't retreat from it. And ties back into the middle way, I think, in Buddhism. And that proceeding without aggression and proceeding without fear. And that takes an impeccability and a deep resonance and empathic attunement to the person you're connecting with. And I worked with somebody who's from a different culture, and she sat back on this team for literally a year. And it was a cultural glaze that mandated the depth of performance on the team. But at some point, for no apparent reason, this person stepped through that glaze, stepped through that veil, and participates very dynamically. And I have no idea what, maybe the context now is safer for her to come into it.
Right. So that's, I think that's something to look at for sure, you know, the safety for them. So Amanda, how are we doing with time?
We are just about finished up, but gosh, you guys, I could talk to you all day. I feel like you always have such insightful answers to all of the questions I have, especially as I read through the book and all the materials and as I take the self-assessments in there as well. So I really encourage everyone who's attended today and everyone who's watching this as a recording to go and check out Present Company. It's such a great roadmap, especially if you're in a team environment where you guys really have named focusing on your teamwork together as one of your goals for this quarter or this year. Gosh, it's such a great read. Thank you guys so much for sharing today. If you didn't get a chance to fill out the survey, please do so. Please meet us here next week. We're going to talk with the Aspen Institute about their principles for executive pay. They've been doing research for the last 3 years to really dive into executive pay. So we hope we see you all there. Tim and Michael, thank you so much for your time today. I'm just so
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you all
Thank you very much. Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.